Welcome to the Expert Talks by Kalkine. I'm Sage, and today's guest is Ms. Rachael Greaves, the CEO of Castlepoint Systems. And to give you some background, Castlepoint is a single system that controls all your data. It acts as a single pane of glass to find, relate, manage and audit every record in your technological network for cloud computing, no matter what system it is stored in, and it does this without any impact on your existing systems or your user base, and without any complex rules, or rules engines, I should say. So to find out more, please stay watching till the end, and I'm excited to bring to you live today Ms. Rachael Greaves, the CEO of Castlepoint Systems, to share insights with us. Welcome to the show, Rachael.
Thank you so much, Sage.
Really do appreciate you making time for us, and congratulations on being named Global AI FinTech 100 as one of the world's leading tech companies using AI to transform financial services.
Thank you so much.
So what was the inspiration behind this brand, please?
So I'm an auditor and a records manager and a security manager, and for the last 10 years or so I've been auditing failures in information governance in federal government and industry. And what I saw consistently was that these projects were failing, not for want of trying. There were certainly the right intentions, but for lack of appropriate technology. We saw some really catastrophic outcomes. We saw Vivian Salon unlawfully deported because her records couldn't be found. We saw Cornelia Rao locked in immigration detention because her records couldn't be managed. We've seen in Australia and overseas effects on Indigenous peoples, lost records of stolen generations, Maralinga testing, which has affected current claimants for compensation. What's obvious is that in Australia and overseas and all around the world, in fact, there's so much data in so many systems, and it's so dynamic that it's become actually impossible to manage that properly, to reuse it, find it and protect it. So I realised that we needed a solution to do that, and that's what we built.
Sounds amazing, and what incredible foresight to be able to see the gap in the market there and the opportunity for you to build your brand. So just to clarify, are you specifically for cloud computing or for any type of computing data storage?
Yeah, any kind. And that's really key because a lot of organisations have a lot of data still on premises, and it will stay there for quite some time. A lot of our classified government departments that we work with need to be on-prem as well for security. So when I sort of designed and architected the solution, my remit was it has to do all of the systems in all of the networks, all of the data formats, all of the time for the whole life cycle, and match those against all of the rules, whether those are regulatory rules or secrecy provisions, privacy or records management, because it's only really with that full coverage across the whole enterprise that you can manage the whole story of an event, the whole story of a project or an asset, and see the whole picture. So that was the first part of the remit, is that wide coverage. And the second part was that in order to be successful, there really have to be no impacts. What I saw consistently with other attempts at information governance were initiatives that created a burden on users to manage their records properly, or caused a performance impact on the network, or copied or modified or moved data which affected its integrity, or needed customization on source systems, which is very complex at this scale when we have dozens or hundreds or even thousands of systems in an enterprise. So the initiative was full scope, full coverage, no impact. And that's what I asked my co-founder to build, and that's what he built using AI.
What an amazing accomplishment. And for some reason, the maxim, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, seems to spring to mind, seeing all these systems integrate and work together. It's quite an incredible feat. So congratulations on being able to achieve that. So staying compliant is really a major factor of financial services. And you just mentioned a few popular cases that have sprung up in the media of late. How can Castlepoint's products assist their clients to maintain accurate financial records, please?
Right. So financial services and other sectors have always had an obligation to manage information properly. That obligation has become increasingly regulated. We've seen that recently with the supply chain principles, the critical infrastructure bill. Financial services, and now also even companies like mine, are going to be subject to increasing rules around compliance. What compliance means is kind of a broad church. Obviously, security and privacy is key, but there's other kinds of compliance that are important as well. That's those regulatory rules. So that's how long we keep information, who's allowed to access it, and how it's allowed to be used and shared. If we don't manage all of those rules together, we can't effectively manage our compliance broadly. But essentially, what financial services and other regulated industries need to know is what information they have, where it is, and who's doing what to it. That's the baseline, and that's what almost no organisation can currently achieve. But we can do better. We can go beyond that, and we can say, out of all those terabytes of data, what has risk and what has value, because that information needs to be managed in a different way than the rest of the data. And then we can go even further to say, all right, well, what rules apply to that information and are they being met? And once we do all of that, we actually can have proper control. The supply chain principles themselves say you have to understand what needs to be protected and how it can be protected. And essentially, if we don't have this full visibility across the whole environment, we can't achieve that outcome.
Yes, I think it's incredibly important for businesses to stay on top of this, to save them unnecessary costs down the track, and of course just to maintain excellent records is a sign of a reputable brand name, I'd say. So money laundering, you mentioned risk, counter-terrorism, they're things that APRA and the regulators have been looking out for, ASIC. It's become more of a concern, and AI is playing a huge role in the fight against fraud and money laundering. Could you please share your insights into how important it is for the sector to sift out this type of activity, and how does Castlepoint Systems help clients manage risk data, please?
Of course. So it is an obligation now more than it was before to actively manage this kind of problem. The only way to identify these issues is to understand your data and what's happening to your data. Our businesses these days are data. Unless you own a diamond mine, your most valuable assets are your data points in the environment, and they're the thing that needs to be managed. If we don't manage them properly, then fraud can occur, which obviously has a financial cost. We can have inefficiency, which has a financial cost. But more and more, the real cost comes from reputational harm. It's easy to lose social license these days. There's an expectation that we will be ethical and responsible with the data of the people that we hold. If we don't do that, then we can't maintain credibility, as you mentioned. So that's becoming more and more important. Ethics in data privacy is already fairly well understood, but ethics in AI is becoming more and more pertinent. There's lots of kinds of AI. It's used by good actors and bad actors. And AI itself can be inherently unethical. So it's very important as we're using this kind of emerging technology to help solve these problems, that we're not creating new problems with that technology that cause a detrimental impact on people and communities that maybe we're not predicting.
Right, that's a very interesting point that you bring up about bad AI or AI that can cause damage to existing systems. I guess there has been some scrutiny in AI in regards to how much control it'll have and if it goes out of control. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. If it goes out of control of the humans that are operating it, do you think there's any risk of that in the near future, or is that more a sci-fi concept?
It's not really. I mean, the singularity is always a risk eventually, like maybe the machines will take over, but the bigger risk is that it's misused. So what we know from ethical AI principles is that machines shouldn't be allowed to make discretionary decisions that can affect human beings. So, for example, we saw an algorithm make decisions that led to the robo-debt problem. There should have been a human involved in those discretionary decisions that can have a really detrimental impact on human beings. So when we get into AI like supervised machine learning, for example, we have a system that is essentially a black box that we can't see into in terms of the algorithm that it's coming up with and why it's making the decisions that it's making. So when we architected our solution, we decided to use a rules as code AI rather than supervised machine learning. That's because rules as code is 100% transparent. When the system makes a recommendation, we can see exactly why it made that recommendation. It's fully traceable back to the data point, and you can see the rule and why it was applied. If you can't see that, then you can't decide if it's correct or not. Rules as code is becoming the standard. A lot of jurisdictions globally are starting to write laws in text and in code from the outset. It will become the global standard for how we manage legislation. So it's an important thing to be considering. But yeah, I mean, there's always risk with AI that we're letting it do too much. Sometimes in the interest of efficiency, we let something happen because it helps us with scale or it helps us, with complex calculations. But we haven't maybe balanced that with thinking about the impact that it might have on individuals if it's wrong and how we can actually make that more accountable.
Well, we're seeing so many technological developments in the course of the last couple of years, and I believe the AI industry is set to grow and expand quite a lot in the next 5 to 10 years, so it'll be a very exciting space to watch. So now to continue on with the discussion, how easy is it please, Rachael, for Castlepoint Systems to be integrated into your client's existing technology, for example?
That was another key architecture decision that we made early on. We needed a system that would not only not have impacts in terms of affecting users or affecting source systems or the network, it had to have a very low barrier to adoption. Something that's complex to implement or expensive just isn't responsive enough to the kind of challenges that we see. We need to be able to get it in quickly, manage the data rapidly. Ideally, we have Castlepoint in before there's a breach, but sometimes we're introduced after there's a breach. So a couple of months ago, we were contacted by an Australian organisation, quite a large one, that was experiencing a malicious data breach. They contacted us on the Friday night and said that they'd had this data spill. So we implemented in their network and we scanned across all the data that had been spilled, made it discoverable. We found all the risk information in there, tax file numbers, credit card numbers, stakeholder ID numbers. And we also coded the secrecy provisions under law because that organisation was subject to dozens of rules from different regulations that impose civil or criminal penalties if there's unauthorised access to those kinds of data. So mapping that really helped them understand their liability from the breach. And we also coded their records authority, which tells them how long they should have kept that data and therefore what of that data should have already been disposed of, which again goes to liability and defensibility. So we had all of that done by Saturday afternoon. And if you can't do it that rapidly, which we can with AI and with good architecture, then you just can't be responsive. But beyond that, we're always responding to new kinds of risks that come up. So, a few months ago, it was sort of realised or recognised that the vaccination certificates that we have in our little COVID app for Medicare include individual health identifier number on those. Not for all states and territories, but for most, and the federal ones do. But the problem is that IHI is essentially a protected identifier. It's sort of as sensitive as a tax file number, and there are laws around who's allowed to access that, who's allowed to keep it on their networks, and how it can be disclosed. But it was added to this certificate, I think, for the ostensible benefit of efficiency or data linking, which is important, but without recognising that there are regulatory rules related to that identifier. So all of our clients suddenly had these IHI numbers spilling into their network because people were emailing in their certificates. And we had to adapt our software. We added automatic IHI identifier. So we added that over a weekend and rolled it out to all the clients the next week. So they could start to find and detect and destroy those IHIs that were spilling into the network. So it's important not just to be able to deploy it rapidly, but also adapt it rapidly when there's those emerging threats.
Yes, those turnaround times you're speaking of are incredibly fast. And would you say that bots are AI?
Yeah, there certainly are. And different bots use different kinds of tools for that. There's natural language processing, which we use in our technology, which is really key. Machines are getting better at understanding human language and what words mean when they're put in certain combinations. So yes, a bot is a kind of AI. AI is a very broad umbrella term for any kind of automation that's trying to do a role that a human would do. There's a limit to what AI can do. AI will never have empathy. It will never have humanity. It's just a processing tool to try to automate activities that people would historically do. So, yes, bots are AI. AI is all around us, as you know. It's probably blurring my wrinkles right now as we speak. So we can't really get away from it, but we have to understand it, and we have to make sure that we're applying the right kind of controls to how we use it and how it is used.
Yes, I totally agree. More awareness needs to be raised around the space, and thank you for sharing your insights to help us achieve that. And more are we seeing blockchain emerge as well. And I think AI and blockchain are terms that we're getting more familiar with. And with blockchain, there's also some parts of machine learning that's involved with that. Can you, and that's machine learning is something that's probably more familiar to the mass population. And you mentioned something about rules of code a little bit earlier. And I've heard about how smart contracts and coding can save the financial sector millions of dollars if it was allowed, if blockchain was incorporated more with the financial institutions. And it's an exciting time to see financial institutions adopting blockchain, such as what Commonwealth Bank is doing. Now, while we've got you, do you have any insights to share about future trends, about how blockchain might impact your business at all with us today?
Yes, just recently, last week, I think, or maybe the end of the week before, the government released the federal data strategy, which focuses a lot on emerging technology and trying to encourage government and industry in Australia to take advantage of that technology. A big push in that strategy is around data sharing, linking, sharing, transparency, openness, portability of data, which are all incredibly noble and important things. But at the same time, we obviously have an increasingly volatile threat environment in terms of data. And that's why the Critical Infrastructure Bill is so key and important and will impact so many industries. I think what people don't necessarily understand is what the threat is. We're all aware that we could be hacked and our data could be stolen or it could be encrypted. People understand those risks, but they don't really understand the foreign state actor risk and why it's so important to protect those critical industries. Because, we can't really conceive of a world where we're at war with a foreign power, and that foreign power pushes a button and shuts down our whole electricity grid and our banking system, our data communications and our water utilities. The reason that these industries are at risk is because they're a target for disrupting the economy in the event of warfare, essentially. And that's not something that we conceive of every day. So I think we all need to realize that, yes, we need to keep sharing. We need to get more value out of our information. That's how we get efficiency. That's how we get profitability. That's how we get better quality outcomes and better decisions, more data points that are better synthesized. But at the same time, the more we do that, the more exposed we are to risk. So there has to be a balance. And RegTech, which is what we are, regulatory technology, which is sort of a subset of fintech, maybe a sibling at this stage, is becoming much more pivotal in being the arbiter between what do we protect and what do we share. And we can base that decision on what are the rules. These rules are enshrined in legislation, they're well understood, but they've never been well applied. And we can use that now as the decision point between whether we share or whether we protect and how we trade those two off.
Thank you very much for breaking that down for us. So we're reaching the end of the discussion now, Rachael. And just before we go, could you share with us your outlook on the economy and the sector for 2022, please?
Sure. I think we'll see continued growth, particularly in data companies and organisations using AI. And that's because of the efficiencies that can be gained. So whatever the sector, if we're incorporating emerging technology, we can achieve gains that weren't necessarily possible before. It will be very important to make sure that we do that ethically, sustainably and scalably. It's quite easy to adopt disruptive technology. It's harder to make it effective in the long run. Blockchain's a good example of that. It's a capability that's been around for a while. There's a lot of interest and appetite, but it's been so far fairly hard for people to get started in using that. Eventually, there comes a tipping point where there's enough of it happening, and this happened with cryptocurrency, for example. There's enough of it happening that it becomes more accessible, and I think we'll see a few of those little bumps over 2022 and beyond, as this kind of technology reaches a critical mass and it suddenly becomes democratized effectively and more available to more organizations.
Absolutely, yes, it's a very exciting time, the evolution of finance as we know it. And Rachel, your insights have been invaluable today. We really do appreciate your time.
Of course, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. And if you've just joined us out there, we just had a very interesting interview with Ms. Rachael Greaves, the CEO of Castlepoint Systems. To watch the full interview, please check out the YouTube channel, kalkinemedia, and keep watching Kalkine for more expert talks, live market updates, and as we say, stay apprised and invest wise with Kalkine.